push. Okay. So Justin Smith from Wolfram Research was real nice to accept our invitation and come here to talk to us, to tell us about the latest features of Mathematica as related to cheminformatics, biomedical informatics, and some high-performance computing. So if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to just raise your hand, just ask him any question that you may have. And if he doesn't have an answer right now, I tell you, he'll come back, with a really good answer. I asked him several times, questions, picked his brain, and he was, he came back to me within a couple of hours, or maybe,
Unless you're Rick Mabry, then I'll.
If you're Rick Mabry, yeah. If you are like a super user, or if you have a more complex question, it may take him a bit more time. But otherwise, please feel free to ask any questions. He'll be more than happy to help. Okay, enjoy.
Okay, thanks so much. Everybody can hear me now. I assume. I don't think we need anybody to give a signal on the other end.
No, not yet.
But my name is Justin. I work for Wolfram Research. Anyway, so this talk today, I think we've got 3 hours, and so the first hour is just going to be a 50-minute overview. So what's new in Mathematica 8? It's just going to be a generic overview. So we'll have some examples that will be really applicable to what you guys are doing, hopefully, and then we'll have some other information in there as well. Bioinformatics is something where I'm sure you guys are collaborating with a lot of other groups. So I think that a lot of this will still be valuable for you guys. So especially those of you who have not used Mathematica before or haven't used it a lot. Is there anybody who has not used it at all? Yeah. Okay. Good. And then is everybody else, have they used it, or just in a certain area, like just for calculus or something like that, or okay. Okay, yes.
I make fun graphs just for the fun of
it. Oh,
it.
very good. So do I. Maybe I'll be able to show you an example of something I've done too. Let me plug in real quick. This is one little technical detail I overlooked, apparently. Okay. And so I did have a fire alarm pull at 3:19 a.m. this morning, so and that was in New Orleans. So bear with me here as I try and put together my thoughts in a coherent way. When somebody asks me, well, what is Mathematica? If you're real new to it, or you don't know anything about it, I had somebody who was a PhD, had her PhD in English Lit. And so, well, what is Mathematica? Can you give me just a 2-sentence, description of it? And I said, sure, it's a technical computing platform, so it's 3 words. That's much shorter than a sentence. But really, that's about, as deep as you can go without really launching into an hour-long conversation about what you can do with this. So it's not just for math, it's a misnomer. The name is a misnomer. Now with Mathematica, we do presentations, so I give all of my presentations in Mathematica. We create documents, and we do HPC computing and that sort of thing. And we also work with data. So the reason that you'd want to use Mathematica as a presentation tool, like I do here, is it works normally like you would expect a slideshow to work, but you can update things on the fly, and you've got a high level of interactivity, and you'll see some examples of this further on down the road. So, people ask, well, what if I want to do this to, 2 to the 1 million or something? Then I can just show that on the fly. I don't have to say, well, just imagine this or something else with a static PowerPoint slide. So, if you were new to Mathematica 20 years ago when it was first created, you needed to know 3 rules for the workflow. And so you'll still want to know these 3 rules today if you plan on being proficient with Mathematica or working more efficiently. The first rule is that all functions are capitalized, in Mathematica. So, if you type something like expand, or if you type something like plot, for example, you'll see that it starts with a capital letter. You'll also notice that you'll use square brackets around anything you're calculating. So here are my square brackets for this function. And then you'll use curly braces for lists or ranges. So if I want to plot x squared, for example, with respect to x, I'll say the range is -3 to 3 or something like that. And then I'll just hit shift and enter to evaluate, or enter on your numeric keypad. And you'll be able to get this. So anyway, those are the rules that you needed to know in terms of just getting started for workflow 20 years ago. You guys will all probably still want to know these rules at some point. In Mathematica 7, which was released 2 years ago now, so this is ancient history, the Classroom Assistant palette was introduced. And for our purposes, this is really nice for giving presentations, working with a smartboard, because you can show people, exactly what you're doing. So if we want to do an indefinite integral, I can say, okay, everyone, here's my cursor. We're going to click on it on indefinite integral, and then we're going to click on basic again, and then x squared, and then we'll tab over, or we'll just come over and click on this input field, and with respect to x, and then we can just hit enter, and we can evaluate that. So no typing at all. This is nice for conferences and that kind of thing as well. There's a lot of functionality in here that you can work with. So if you want to use this for your workflow in Mathematica, you can. You can create matrices, and you can do statistics in here. There are built-in menus for that, and you can create 2D and 3D graphics also. Now, the newest way of working in Mathematica is with freeform input. So now all you have to do to start working in Mathematica is just type what you want to have happen. So solve the equation, and then the equation. What happens is Mathematica gives you the Mathematica input that you would need to use, and then it solves this, or it evaluates for you. So for something like plot sine x, Mathematica gives me the syntax here, and you can see the assumptions that it made in the range, and then it gives me a graphic. So a couple examples here where we want the exact same result, but we're going to say different things to get it. So plot sine x, or we could say graph of sine with x in parentheses, and we'll get the exact same result. And then we could also say something like visualize the sine of x, so we spell it out entirely. So if you're transitioning from another software, this is a really easy way to get started. Yes?
I was wondering, you can... Okay, I was wondering, you're emphasizing the free form of it, so you type plot sine of x, and then it makes these assumptions. But if say the range isn't what I like, if I want to change that, can I just go in and change it?
Sure. So what you would want to do is just click on this output, and it says, when you move the cursor over, it says replace the cell with this input. You can just simply click on that, and then now if I want to do something like negative pi to pi, then I can just hit shift and enter and reevaluate that. Now there are some other examples in here, integration and that sort of thing. There are actually going to be a lot of examples in this notebook. If you'd like me to send this notebook out to you, just send me an email and I'll send it out. I don't think I'll logistically be able to send it out to everybody who just attended at this point, but if you're interested, I'll send this out to you. There are a lot of examples we just won't have time to go over today, but they may be interesting to you, so you might want to take a look at those. But there are other things in here to explore, and actually this is a really broad area. So there are things like a mortgage calculator, where if you don't type anything else in, it just makes a bunch of assumptions, basically showing you that it has this functionality. And then something I find interesting here is that you can pull in data on something like your breakfast. So if I try and evaluate toast, what Mathematica will do is, again, make some assumptions and give you the average nutrition facts for a 50-gram piece of toast, right? So if you are watching calories or something like that, and you had orange juice as well, what you can do is, normally how the workflow would be in most softwares, you would type in toast and get some results, and then you would type in orange juice and get some results. But in Mathematica, because you can calculate things symbolically, you can just do all of that work on the front end. So this is true of data that's importable, it's true of images, it's true of audio files, it's true of everything. So you can do these mathematical operations on objects. So we'll talk a little bit more about symbolics in a couple minutes, though. So that's the third way of working with Mathematica. So as I mentioned, you can use Mathematica when you are teaching classes or giving lectures or presentations. You can also use it to create quizzes and tests, so either for print or for web deployment. So here's an example where maybe this is a lesson and you're just throwing this together quite quickly. You need a supplement or something like that. So this is just some basic formatting, and we'll talk about doing this in the next hour. But you can see that all of this is done directly in Mathematica, creating these graphics, working with all your typesetting and alignments. All of that stuff is directly done within this Mathematica notebook interface. Here's an example of a quiz where we've just changed around some coloring for these cells, so something pretty similar. There are some other examples down here too. Maybe you're teaching alongside a textbook, or you're actually writing a textbook, and you like something that's more traditional looking, your output anyway. So here, your output is just like your Mathematica input. It has capital letters for functions, and it has square brackets, which mean evaluate. But if we want to change that, we can just edit our preferences. And so under output, we can change that to traditional form. And now when we reevaluate this, you see this. Functions have been changed back to lowercase, and square brackets have been changed back to parentheses, and the exponents are in the right order, and so on. Yes?
You said that we can make 3D graphs.
Yes.
If I have two 3D graphs and I'm interested in finding the region where they help each other,
Uh-huh.
I need a function for that region. Can I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll go over a couple examples for graphics in this session, and then maybe we can do some hands-on examples in the next session where maybe we're just subtracting two functions or something like that. Okay, so I mentioned that there are some really powerful interactive tools, which makes Mathematica a great tool for giving presentations. And one of those, or for doing your research and presenting your results, one of those tools is this function called manipulate. And so manipulate was introduced several years ago, but it's been refined since. And manipulate is our model building function. So, if you look at something like this, when I learned about frequency and amplitude, somebody would come up to the board and say, this is frequency, this is amplitude, now here are the equations for it. Now you can see it in an oscilloscope, now just think about it or envision it or something like that, And then that was the extent of my hands-on experience with these concepts. But with manipulate, I can type manipulate in front of anything I'm calculating in Mathematica, and I can bring that concept to life. So I can add in a variable like frequency here, and then what I'll do is I'll define frequency. So it's just going to go from 1 to 3. And now when I reevaluate this, I've got a slider, and I can dynamically adjust the value of FREQ in real time. So I've got a drop-down menu here where I can play this like a movie. I can control its speed, make it go forwards and backwards. Or I could step it through in increments. Or if somebody asks, well, what does a frequency of 1.2 look like, I can type that in and hit enter and evaluate it. Or if I have some complicated interaction here of elements, then I can create bookmarks. So I can say, this is my hypothesis, check out position A or position B or something like that. And then we'll talk about deployment in just a couple minutes, but that will lend itself well to deployment. But if we want to make this more descriptive, it's very easy to do. We could add in something like amplitude. So here we'll say amp goes from 1 to 3 as well, just for demonstration purposes, and so we have another slider. Or maybe we want to compare functions, so instead of just sine, maybe we want to replace that with a variable. We'll call it fun, and now we'll say fun is a list of functions, sine, cosine, and tangent. And so now when I reevaluate, I've got buttons. So notice this is discrete, so I have buttons. So things that are variable, I've got sliders, discrete, I've got buttons. If I have more than 5 elements in a list, like secant, cosecant, and cotangent, then I get a drop-down menu. So all the aesthetics here are automated as well. So I'm not specifying that I want sliders, I'm not specifying that I want a drop-down menu or what these things should look like or anything like that. That's all taken care of for me automatically. Now, one thing I think is worth pointing out is that if I put in a value like 8 here, what would normally happen? You know, for those of you that have been programming for a while. Anybody? Guesses? Right. That, I mean, normally if I were programming this in C or Java or anything, it would just crash. But there's quite a bit of give here in Mathematica, so if I evaluate something that's not in my range, it just blushes and evaluates anyway. So there's some give here where you don't have to 100% bulletproof and invest all of that time in making sure that your model is absolutely bulletproof before sending it along to students. So this is especially handy for quick little solutions and examples. So maybe the end result for this model is that it's going to go out on some lab machines and students are going to play with this model, or they're going to download it from Moodle or whatever CMS you're using, and then maybe they'll answer these questions. That's the typical answer, right? And then maybe there's a button that says submit, and then it auto grades, or it dumps this into a MySQL database so that that grading process is automated. Yeah, so the integration is already in here. It's not difficult to bridge that. So, if you've got a lot of material or content already, or it's something a little bit complex that you're studying, and you're not quite sure where to start, we've got this resource called the Demonstrations Project. This is a really good resource for getting started in Mathematica, because there are almost 7,000 of these models that have already been built. So there's really no reason to reinvent the wheel. If you're looking for a particular concept or topic, you could type in something like physics and just see what you get. There are over 1,300 models in physics, but to be more specific, maybe you'd narrow it down and type in thermodynamics, and so then you get something a little bit closer. So you only have 100 models now to choose from. But anyway, I think if we type in just bioinformatics, there are at least 6 in here that have that keyword specifically. So I think you may need to do something more specific for whatever particular topic you guys are looking for. So it's something in like genealogy. Maybe that's not the right keyword. I might have to look through topics. If I'm looking in, for something like something related to genes, maybe I'll go to life sciences, and then biology, and then molecular biology, and then I can drill down that way too. So I think this was an example model that I found that I thought might be interesting, related to protein folding. So you can come out here and play with these models. Anybody can get to this point. Say maybe I'm teaching something, just as an example, on secant and tangent lines, and I'd like to incorporate this model into my lecture, but I'm talking about 4th order polynomials here. And so instead of just using this, what I'll do is I'll just open up the source code notebook and I'll edit function, and I'll edit the this label, and then now I can play with this model again, and you can see that it functions the exact same, but I didn't invest hardly any time in this. All I did was change the function. All of this other stuff here, this is just formatting to make this look nice, axes labels and image size and text and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to fuss with that. I've already got a publication ready model. I'm just going to modify that. So this is a good resource for getting started. You can actually see what people have already used, and then you can build off of that. So you can take their input and then just use it as your own. So jumping back to symbolics. So we talked a little bit about symbolics with bread and toast, right, and how we can calculate those things. So calculating symbolic things is not new. That was Mathematica's claim to fame 20-some years ago. So we can do things like expand A and B, and A and B can be, again, images, or they could be bread and toast, or whatever. But since we just talked about manipulate, maybe we want to make this a little more lively. So we'll just type manipulate in front of this and replace the constant 30 with a variable here, n, and we'll say n goes from 1 to 20 in steps of 1. So now when we reevaluate this, maybe we want to step this through and say, okay, this is to the first power, to the second, to the third, to the fourth, to the fifth. So it makes this a little bit more engaging for colleagues or for whomever we want to send this to. You can do PDEs and ODEs symbolically. You can solve things symbolically. So here's the quadratic being solved. This might have some applicability for bioinformatics, like a damping factor. So this is more of a purely physics example, but maybe there's a damping factor that you haven't specified, and then maybe you're going to use manipulate to specify that that damping factor is a range. So you can use manipulate in that way. And then in terms of numerics, I don't spend much time talking about numerics, but I think the key takeaway is that you can use Mathematica to do numeric things that you cannot use in any other system that's available currently. So whatever you're doing in terms of numerics, you should be using Mathematica for that. Sparse arrays, matrices, basically linear algebra. Again, you can use the Classroom Assistant palette to create these things. So here's an example. You get this framework again where you can just go through and tab through or arrow through these fields. We'll spend a lot more time with matrices because I think that everybody in here is doing something with data. I would hope, anyway. And so, is this familiar to you guys? This this list-based setup, or this list type of setup? Is anybody not familiar with that? Okay, so if you aren't familiar with this, I mean, this is row 1, row 2, row 3, and we can look at this in matrix form if we need to, just by typing matrix form. So as we get into working more with data, I think this will be important. But then we can also create matrices programmatically, so if we want to use this table function to create a 5x5, we can do that, or use random integers. And I think I've got a couple examples where we just need to create some random data. And again, we'll talk about that later in the hands-on section. And then we can perform operations on these matrices. So we can find the dot product, or the determinant, or the norm, or the inverse. And then something important for us to keep in mind is that Mathematica always gives an exact result. So here, we're getting an exact result, obviously. If you want an approximate answer, in your argument, you can put in a decimal point, or you can put in a backtick, or you can use this numeric approximation function n. And then if we don't specify the level of precision using n, it just defaults to, I think, 6 decimal places. It depends on the computer that you're using. But in this case, we're using %, and we'll see, or we'll talk about a little bit more of these shortcuts later on. But %, just means take the last output. So numerically approximate the last output, and that's what we've got here as the result. And again, there are more examples down here related to computation, although some of these are more basic, maybe not what we're focused on in this particular session. Now, in terms of visualization, and we'll actually dive into this later, but you can use, well, there are lots of software that allow you to create create graphics, right? But the really nice thing here is that you'll have a really high quality graphic right at the outset. It'll be interactive, so both 2D and 3D graphics have a high degree of interactivity, and they're intuitive to use as well. So, for example, if I'm plotting multiple functions together, you know, here's my input. So I just have these two functions. When I evaluate this, I don't know if you can see it all that well, but one is blue and one is pink. So that coloring is done automatically, so I don't have to worry about making that distinction. For 3D graphics, they're all OpenGL, so you can rotate and zoom, and you can pan. So as we get more into these complex visualizations, this will become important. And then just one quick tidbit for now about interactivity for 2D graphics is this function called tooltip. So I just included this one in the overview because I use this one an awful lot. Tooltip is really common. It's very easy to use. All you do is type tooltip. And then what happens here is it keeps your graphic clean by putting the labels in a pop-up. So as you move your cursor over the curve in this case, it just shows you the function that was used to create that curve. So, you know, I'm not doing any extra work, programming work on the back end to get any of this. It's all done very quickly for me. Yes?
How do you make the hard copy?
Oh, how would you print out the tooltip labels? Let's talk about that in just a couple minutes. Because that's a good question. But I've got a different topic that I think will be more appropriate to address that one in. We talked a little bit about 3D visuals. So these are just examples of things that have been created with these functions, 2D, 3D. One thing I didn't mention is that, yet anyway, is that you can use Mathematica as a data visualization system. So especially nice for business presentations and that kind of thing. And you guys might be using this more than the average folks in academia outside of the business schools. But you know, we kind of are used to using something like Excel, which is a non-professional tool to create our presentations, when really we can use something like Mathematica and get a really professional graphic out of it. And then now in Mathematica 8, and we'll talk about some of the examples here, all of these specialized subjects and fields are integrated now. And then for advancing our graphics, there's support for transparency and specularity. So, you know, here's an example of transparency. You can kind of see through this shell. Here's a simple light show. And then new in Mathematica 8 is texture mapping. So, you know, here we've just created a 3D graphic. So there's our 3D graphic, and then we've just simply mapped that graphic on top of that 3D image. So really, you can see all that happened is we just dragged and dropped this image into Mathematica and then texture mapped that on top of it. This might be appropriate for this morning, maybe our breakfast. Might get into doing some sort of modeling like this if we're in the medical school. And then showing a gradient on a surface. So maybe we've got this graphic, you know, where we're using Streamplot, and maybe we can visualize it. But maybe a colleague is having a more difficult time visualizing it, or this isn't really journal ready. You know, maybe we can do a better job of describing the phenomenon here. by overlaying this on top of a 3D model. So we'll create the 3D graphic, so each of these by themselves is necessary but not sufficient. I don't think anybody in here has gone to law school, but that's the favorite phrase. So anyway, we can just simply overlay that stream plot now on top of that 3D graphic, and so we've got a lot more descriptive mechanism now. Okay, so we already talked about automated aesthetics, automatic coloring and that kind of thing, but another important thing is that branch cuts and discontinuities are automatically detected and rendered appropriately. So we've got a couple side-by-side comparisons here, adaptive sampling as well, and region of interest selections. And you can easily customize your graphics, so if you want to change the thickness of the curve, or if you want to change the color of the curve, or make it dashed or dotted, you can do all of that. You can add grid lines or filling or a title. And then you can also annotate your graphics on the back end. So, maybe I'm getting this ready for publication, and I don't really want to work with my labels programmatically anymore. It might be easier for me just to go into my drawing tools now. In Mathematica 7, this was two separate palettes, but now in Mathematica 8, there's a single palette, and then there are some tools for graph theory as well that have been added. But maybe we're going to add some text. This is text, and you can change the format, of course, and then you can maybe draw arrows or something like that. You control the thickness of the arrowheads and that kind of thing. And so, maybe once this graphic is finished, we can save it as a PDF or a JPEG, or if we're working with tech, an EPS file. So you have all of those formats available to you. In fact, you can save the entire notebook as tech if you need to, or as PostScript if you're just going to send it right to a publisher to publish your manual, and so on. Okay, so let me just address real quick some of the options here. So, I mentioned that there are options available, and there are a lot of ways of finding out what options are available for the functions that you're working with. So if I'm already working with a function like plot, for example, I can type double question mark, which is a shortcut, and I can actually quickly see how I can enter plot if I'm not going to use my autocomplete. And then I can also see the options and default settings for this function plot. So I can see that by default, every plot that I make, every time I use this function, axes are going to be on. So I'm going to have axes on my plots. I can change that default setting if I want, or I can do it on the fly. Now, you'll see in your Mathematica notebooks, sometimes frequently, you'll have these double arrows. And if you click on these, it's a hyperlink to the full documentation in Mathematica. And so, again, you'll see that header information here. You'll be able to click on more information. So, if you didn't know what axes were, you can see here it's whether or not to draw axes. And maybe I can even drill down further just by clicking on axes. I can see some examples, of modifying these things. I think the real beauty in documentation is that you can modify things. So I can change it. It's all read-only, so my changes aren't saved. Whoops, maybe we want to do sin x over x instead. So you can actually get close to what you want just using documentation. Then you can copy this and paste it back into your working notebook and continue working if you want. So this is a really great resource, and I use documentation an awful lot. In fact, a lot of people use documentation an awful lot. It's just a really good all-around resource. So you had asked a question before about, what was the question? I can't remember.
It was being able to print with the labels.
Being able to print with labels. Okay, so what I would do is I would just go into Tooltip, and then I would take a look at the settings for printing. I think that what you can do here, you'd want to look through the documentation and find out where exactly it says, it allows you to get that label to stick. And I think there are a variety of ways to accomplish that. But you can find out how to do all of that stuff directly within documentation. And if you're not sure what function you're looking for, you can always browse too. Or, if you know something that's even remotely related to what you're looking for, you can type that in and see what happens. So when I started traveling a lot some years ago, I would have the latitude and longitude of the places I wanted to go, and I wanted to find the optimal route through them. And so I'd heard of this thing called the traveling salesman problem. So I typed in traveling salesman. And the first thing that came up is find shortest tour. And what this gave me was a pretty nice example of the shortest tour through every country in the world. So you'll probably get some pretty good ideas in documentation related to what you're doing if you explore it. Okay. So Mathematica has two distinct data sets. And we can talk about this in a little bit more detail in a later session if anyone is interested. But for now, I guess the key takeaway is that you can use Mathematica's freeform input to look up data. So if you want something like the melting point of caffeine, you can just type that in. And then Mathematica interprets this, so you can see the input that would be used to programmatically find this. And so it goes out to our servers and it pulls the result in. So 235 degrees Celsius is the result. Or you could type in something like caffeine molecule and you'll get a graphic for that. So maybe, yes? Yeah, good question. It's in documentation. So you'll find if you look up chemical data in documentation, I always just highlight it and hit F1. Down here it will tell you, or it should say in more information, that it's pulling things in Celsius by default. Good question. Yes. Yeah. The bane of this for that application is that because you can take the output data, so that the result is data in and of itself, right? So you could actually take this, use the % sign, and use it in further calculations. So you can't attach a Celsius symbol or anything like that to it, or else it would screw up your calculations further on down the line. So if we're looking for something that we're having trouble finding in this data set, maybe it's coming up with empty set or error or something like that, you can actually see everything that's in this data set just by typing chemical data, open and close square bracket. Empty set here is equal to all, so you'll get the exact same result if you type that in. And then you can also see the properties for all of those chemicals that are in here. So maybe I want to find atom positions or something like that. Whatever it is I'm looking for, viscosity, I can find it in here. So these are the properties that are available. And then maybe I want to then combine those two. So I found what I'm looking for, caffeine and molecule plot. So now I'm just going to reevaluate. I've got this 3D model now that I can use in my presentation or whatever I'm doing. I can rotate this and again zoom in and out because as with all 3D graphics, they're interactive. Yeah. Yeah.
What if you want to make this a really large picture? When exporting, can you specify the DPI and the size?
Yeah, DPI I'm not sure of.
Just the size of pixels.
You can.
Much larger than your screen resolution.
Yeah, you can control resolution with exporting images. I can't remember the exact option for that, but I think it's in this how-to here specifying resolution. I think we can just do resolution and see where it takes us. Okay, image resolution is in here, so it looks like you can, just by typing image resolution, for these elements. So I think that you would just need to specify that in, I don't know. We'll have to look through there for the second session. Yeah, but you definitely can. You can also control when you're exporting to .mov files. You can control that quality also. I've got another example here for chemical data or using chemical data. So, radiation is in the news here, so we'll create a decay network for uranium. So, we're not looking anything up in a book or anything like that. What we're getting here are just relationships set up between these elements. So this is all computable again. Obviously this is a list, so it's bracketed with brackets. And so what we'll do for, maybe we're actually going to send this to the Wall Street Journal or something like that. And we can't send something like this. This just is not visually appealing. So what you'd want to do is just use layered graph plot, and then you would use the previous output, and then maybe add some options to that to make it even nicer. And so now you have this nice visual of this decay network. Maybe we're doing something for our personal use with stocks. You can get real-time stock information, so you can make better decisions there. A lot of this stuff doesn't really apply to what we're talking about today, so I'll just kind of yada 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 through the financial information. But it's one of my favorite things, so if you want to talk about it later, that'd be great. But then there are some other examples in here too, pulling in proteins. So again, we can look these up using natural language. So we can actually see the list. Or again, you can see all of the data that's in this protein database, where you can find the molecule plot. So some of these become a little bit more complicated and a little bit more data intensive. And then there are some other things in here too, genome data and graph data and that kind of thing that that you guys may want to explore. Now, yeah, oh yes.
So now for 3D, 3Ds are kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
Not much fun.
Yeah.
So is there any support for that? So you could have these models in 3D?
I have not seen anything that's native. I won't say that there's nothing in the works for that either. I have seen people who are in 3D labs, like who actually create the programs and the software. They use Mathematica to create that. So they'll use Mathematica in that manner, but I don't know of any built-in functions for that specifically. And we'll talk a lot about importing and exporting data in a little while here, but there's really robust support for importing all different types of data, which is really good news for all of us, because I'm sure all of you are importing lots of data and working with different data sources and formats and that kind of thing. So I just have some basic examples here where just importing an Excel file. So you just say import file path. And then we can just insert the file. So I've got some sample lab data here. It's just out of an Excel spreadsheet. But we can. I normally say, well, almost every modern file format is supported. Occasionally, I'll find somebody that says, well, I've got the Sun Microsystems format from 1987, and it's an image and it won't work in Mathematica. So there are going to be some that you're not going to be able to pull in, but the vast majority, the basic things, Excel, zip files, DBF, all the way up to FITS files if you're an astrophysicist, or medical images like MRIs and that kind of thing. You can drag and drop all of those directly into Mathematica. I'm not sure. What is the what is the file format for? Oh, .pov. Yeah, so it does have a full detail here on working with that. Oh, wait, that's a different export supports the POV format version 3.6. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of formats that I have no idea even exist. PDB was one that I didn't know, I wasn't aware of prior to putting the next notebook together. But I have some examples of that too. So it's kind of surprising to see just how many are actually supported. But to get back to this import example, so I've imported just this file, and I prefer to do things a little bit more rigid as opposed to just dragging and dropping. And then I also like to set up relationships or assignments. So I've just called this data. And anyway, now I can very easily work with data. So if I want to visualize it using list plot, all I do is type list plot data, and I can see that. You can also import files from the web. We'll get a lot of experience with this in a little while. But here we're just importing this gzip file. It's just a terrain file, and then applying this color function to it. Here's an example where we pull in an XML file and a CSV file at the same time, and then we also coordinate this with our Mathematica data to create a nice little infographic modeling unemployment. So we're also using this color function, this automated color function called, I think it's temperature map. But anyway, if you want to see all of the different color functions or color schemes available, you can just click on Color Schemes palette, and then you can browse through all of these things. And then there are automatic thresholds in here that allow you to apply temperature maps to your data. In this case, there's a little bit more specifying done for thresholds. But you can see here, you know, the cooler colors are assigned to lower values, and the warmer colors are assigned to higher values. And then a lot of people don't normally think of Mathematica as a programming language. They just hear the name Mathematica, and then they just think integration or something. But the shining example of what you can do with Mathematica in terms of programming is to create something like Wolfram Alpha. So has anybody not seen Wolfram Alpha before? Anybody not know what it is? Okay. Okay, good. And then I didn't see any hands in the remote people. But anyway, Wolfram Alpha is just wolframalpha.com. And what this is it's a computational knowledge engine. So it looks kind of like Google, but it's not. It's actually browsing its own database, and so it's not scanning web pages, you know, so it's not going to pull up any non-verified data. But you can type in things like ISS, which is an abbreviation for the International Space Station. And the interesting thing is that it will give you the result. It will also give you some other data about the International Space Station. I mean, it tells you exactly where it is. And the nice thing, or the interesting thing, I think, is that this is actually doing the physics calculation. So it's not pulling this from a report or anything like that. This doesn't link to anything. It actually just does the calculations. So there are some interesting things that you can do with Wolfram Alpha. And you'll notice that this interface is very similar to the new freeform input in Mathematica. It turns out that Wolfram Alpha was such a nice little innovation that we borrowed parts of it and put them into Mathematica. So you can do some really surprising things with this as a programming language. And of course, its power is derived from its flexibility and adaptability. So you can use any of these programming styles that you want to or need to when you're tackling your problems. We'll talk a little bit about programming over the next 2 hours, but not a whole lot. So we're not in a programming course per se, but this is definitely something that's a very powerful aspect of Mathematica. Some things that you guys especially will find interesting are things like functions and pattern matching. And then there are some examples in here that we might work through if we have time during the next session. But otherwise, we'll dig into this a little bit further. Now, if you have a lot of data to crunch, or you know, maybe you're getting to that stage where, okay, I'm becoming proficient with programming in Mathematica, now I need to take it to the next level. I really need to speed up these calculations because I'm doing really complex things. We have built-in parallel computing support that happened in Mathematica 7. And now in Mathematica 8, we have support for GPU computing. So if you're not familiar with parallel computing, basically what Mathematica allows you to do is take advantage of whatever hardware that you have available. So at a school like LSU, you've got the ability to install Mathematica on literally every campus piece of hardware, and then you can go out and leverage those non-functioning processes or those idle processes, and you can use all of those computers as an ad hoc supercomputer to perform your calculations. So you can put little kernels on all of those little worker machines, and then with a touch of a button you can have that calculate for you. So in this case, I've got an example where I'm just using my local hardware, and I think most people will typically just use their local hardware. So what we'll do is we'll just compare these different functions. So if we use this function called table and we time how long it takes to do this evaluation, it takes almost 3 seconds. Okay. Now, since I have a dual core computer, if I use parallel table instead, so that's the only difference here is that I parallel table and I evaluate this, it says launching 2 kernels, and then the result I get back is 1.6. So I get a pretty good speed up out of this. You know, if you scale this up and you're waiting hours for your calculation to finish, this is pretty good. You know, I can only wait 30 minutes instead of a full hour. Of course, this is a dual core computer, and so if you have something like a netbook, it will just say something like unicore detected, and it's just going to do the calculation in sequential order then instead of in parallel. So there are some other functions in here too for parallelization. So if you're just doing some normal math problem, something that looks like this, and it's taking a while, you can try typing just parallelize in front of it. So this takes 3.5 seconds. But if I just type parallelize in front, it takes a little bit less time. So I got a pretty good speed up out of that one. And if you can't do it, of course, here's the answer. It just says it can't be parallelized, so it just goes ahead and evaluates it normally. I mentioned GPU computing. So if you're not familiar with GPU computing, it just means that you're using the graphics card in your computer as a processor. So CUDA, or NVIDIA, has their closed source CUDA system. And then if you don't have an NVIDIA card, you can possibly use OpenCL. And we support both of those in Mathematica. So whichever way you decide to go, you'll be supported. But you get a really nice speed up out of CUDA. So I've got one example here where we load CUDA link, and then we're going to generate some random numbers and then feed those into a European call option. And then what we're going to do is time how long that takes. And it usually takes about 9 seconds or so. Okay, 9.3 today because it's Friday. And so now all we have to do, again, is just modify this function by typing CUDA in front of it. When we reevaluate this, it takes a lot less time, 0.9 seconds. So you get a really solid speed up out of this if you have that hardware available.
So about recomputing, how does your licensing?
So are you at LSU? Well, we've got unlimited licensing here for anybody who's faculty, staff, or student. So you don't need to worry about installing it on a cluster. I mean, you could run 1 million processes at once.
So we have learning system, which is not exactly LSU.
Okay. If you have an exclusive lease on it, or have a way of partitioning it off so that only LSU affiliates can access it, then you're fine.
But the thing is, other faculties from other universities can access the machine.
Okay.
But is it Louisiana, in Louisiana, or?
Yeah, Louisiana. Then the licensing is, I think, for LSU only.
Yeah, the licensing is for LSU only, but if the other affiliate members all have the same licensing that LSU has, then it's no big deal. But we could talk about that maybe at the break. I've got a couple other examples before we take a break here. I don't know if anybody's doing anything with C yet, but I guess there's this realization that there's a lot of legacy C code out there, and so Mathematica 8 has much more robust C compatibility or functionality. So faster compiled execution, and then there are some examples down here for code generation. So this is a pretty nice setup now. And then in terms of connectivity, as I mentioned, you can use database link to connect to databases. Of course, it's built into Mathematica.
Did you get the email that I'm here?
And then there's also, I'll mention to you guys, this thing called Wolfram Workbench, which you guys have access to for free as well. But it's like an Eclipse environment. So if you've used Eclipse to program Java and you're familiar with that, this will be very familiar. It'll be a very comfortable environment. But you can program much more efficiently with Wolfram Workbench. So I took the Wolfram Workbench course that's available online and really learned a lot about that. Really loved it. So that's something worth checking out. And then specialized application areas. In terms of statistics, I'm just going to breeze through all of these specialized application areas so we can get to break. I think we've reached the saturation point. But there are a couple graphics here, distributions compared to other systems. So here are some plots that are new, some charts. I think one of the more interesting things, and something we'll do an example of here, is computing probabilities and expectations. So I would guess that we do this a little bit in bioinformatics. I use it for more mundane things like, what's the probability that 3 out of the 4 engines on my plane go out at once? And I think the answer is that it's about the same probability as 1 out of 4 going out at once. Image processing might be something that you guys are interested in using. This is an example that was new in Mathematica 7, so just taking an MRI image and then using manipulate to sharpen it. So you can see the input here that was used. It's just the image that was pulled into this function. But now you've got things like real-time image acquisition. So you can take a picture using your built-in hardware. That's not very flattering. This is an example that I just put in here, and using CUDA for image processing, but I'm not comfortable using using that one yet. I don't think it works quite as well as I had hoped for it to. But here's an example where this is T-Rex vision. So as I move around, it can see me, but then as I stop moving, I disappear. So I'm not sure what sort of applications you would have in bioinformatics for this, but there may be something out there that maybe you're using some sort of advanced imaging for magnification or something like that. There are some other interesting things out here that you might have more use for, like edge detection. So you can find edges in images, or you can find matching points in an image. So in this case, just of the moon. I have some other interesting things in here. If you do email me and want this notebook, there's a blog post on digital steganography. And then one of the things that I thought was interesting that would be appropriate here is this this example of exporting your 3D graphics, your animation, all of this into a .mov file. So I showed this to a group, and they couldn't quite believe that this was just Mathematica, but really, I mean, this is using all the built-in functions, this is using the 3D graphics. You can see here that it's just the export box. So this is just, it basically said out on the left-hand side, and then we just exported this. So it's probably just like filepath.mov, and then it was %sign for the last output. So nothing really spectacular or difficult with this. Oops. Okay. And then there are some other things down here too that I didn't mention, such as graph theory, that might really come in handy for you. So finding paths. The example I've got is just finding a path through a maze. So you can do all of that heavy lifting automatically. So there's our graphic. We just import it. We write the algorithm to find the path, and then we just have Mathematica do that process, do that work for us. Okay, and then as I mentioned, you can deploy Mathematica in a TeX format or as a PDF. So it's definitely nice for that. And then just as a quick recap, presentations, document creation, and heavy lifting for computation. And then there's some really good resources available for those of you who are new and for those of you who are progressing. The Learning Center is a great resource. There are lots of free videos out there. There's a hands-on start tutorial if you're not going to make it to the next session. And then there's a library archive where you can download existing notebooks, that kind of thing. And then you can always send myself email as well. And I try and be timely about email, but typically if I'm traveling, it might take a little while. So we'll take a, I think, 10-minute break or so, and then come back and we'll dive in to the nuts and bolts. So hopefully everybody at that point has a laptop, because we'll need a laptop, or you can just take notes or something if you like to. So any questions before we go to break real quick? Okay, good. Sounds good. On their laptops, or is at least ready to take some notes. So I went with the LSU purple here for the title. So and this is I tried to gear some of the examples for computational biology or bioinformatics, or you know, that realm, but of course this is applicable, it's broadly applicable to, or hopefully it's broadly applicable to what you're doing. So what we'll start off with first is just taking a look at the Mathematica notebook interface. And the thing about the Mathematica notebook is that when you're thinking about it, you know, if you do a control new, you get this window, a control N or file new, new notebook. You have just this blank screen that shows up, right? Of course, yours won't say shared, but the first thing you'll notice is that, you know, it's not a maximized window. It just kind of floats out here on its own, and there are good reasons for this, but I think the important thing is that it's representative of, or I think it's representative of how Mathematica actually works. So Mathematica is split into two parts: the computational portion and then the front end portion. So there's the kernel and then the front end, and we're looking at the front end. So the front end sends information to the kernel does all of the work, and then sends the results back to this front end interface. And that's what, so this is how you interact with it. So this is the layer, the buffer between you and that computer. So when we talk about notebooks, this here is a notebook. If we were to close this, or if we were to go File, New, Slideshow, this too is a Mathematica notebook. It's just formatted automatically to be a slideshow, and then you've got this slideshow palette that pops up. And when you're creating a slideshow or a presentation, if you know that's what you're going to do right at the outset, this is a really useful tool. I use this all the time because you can insert a new slide and that kind of thing. But anyway, you can see here what happens when you insert a new, if you go File, New, Slideshow, and it comes up with this, and you can see it says slide 1 of 3 and slide 1, and there's some different formatting things going on, and then there are these brackets over here on the right, which if you've not used Mathematica before may be sort of mysterious to you. But this is the structure. So there are some really neat things that you can do with this. So what we'll do is, instead of starting from that notebook, we'll just open up a new notebook, just do a Control N or something like that. And then you'll have this tab that says Choose How to Enter Input if you just move your cursor over it. And if you click on that, you can choose from Mathematica Input, which it says is default. So if you were to just open up this notebook and start typing something, it would be in this input format. So it would automatically format your cell in that way. Same thing for freeform input. This means that your cell will be automatically formatted for freeform input. So if you click on that, then you can immediately start typing, you know, what you want to query for freeform. Excuse me. The other is Wolfram Alpha query. So you can access Wolfram Alpha from directly in Mathematica. and it will tell you the shortcut too. So these will all just format cells a certain way. You can also do plain text. So this will just simply format your cell so that you can start typing out, maybe your thesis or something like that. So we can do plain text to start, so that's what I'll do. So I just click on plain text, and then I just get a blinking cursor like I would in any word processor. So I can start typing, this is my document, and then that's it. So I've got my text here. Now, as I mentioned, you've got this cell bracket over here, and this is something that's going to grow with this text that you're working in. So if you put a return just by hitting enter into the cell, and then just type in more text, you can see that this cell has just expanded to contain this. So this is all one, think of it as all one component. Now what I can do is I'll just go to Window and then Show Toolbar, and I show this toolbar typically right at the outset. If I'm ever going to be working with text or anything like that, the first thing I'm going to do is pull up this toolbar, because it allows me to do all sorts of different things with my cell. I can center it, or basically work with it more easily. Now the important thing is, as you get started, is that you may want to highlight this cell and then change the style or the formatting of the cell itself. And you can do that right with this drop-down menu. So I can change this to a title, or I can change it to a subtitle, or I can change it to a section. And you'll notice that the cell changes and everything in the cell changes too. So you can do all of this. So if I want to change it back to input, I just change this back to input. And now I can do my math again if I want to. So that's important to know. You can always go back and start using shortcut keys. So like Alt-7 is change this to text, or Alt-4 is change it to a section, and so on. And as I mentioned, this is nice. Having this toolbar is nice when you're getting started, because it will actually explain to you what format your cell is in that you're working in. Then you can come down here, and of course it defaults back to input. That's the default. And then you can start doing some math problems, maybe 2 + 2, or I'm going to use another default setup and say, variable equals 1 or something, and then I can do Shift and Enter to evaluate that. So again, Shift and Enter is evaluate, and Enter just puts a return inside your cell. Now, anytime you're working in this notebook environment, you'll notice that as I move my cursor up and down, as I glide between these cells, my cursor changes orientation. So whenever my cursor is horizontal, I can click, and then that means that I can insert a new cell there. If my cursor is vertical, then if I'm clicking inside of a cell. So you can see the cell is over here that I'm clicking in. Or I can click up here, and you can see this is an input cell, this is an output cell, the resulting cell. So that's something to keep in mind as you get started, because you don't want to get your cursor position in the wrong cell and then start typing and goober up your input, right, or your equations. Or you can do something like freeform input. So if I click on freeform input from that tab, then I can start typing, and I can do something like solve 2x minus 3 4x or something, and it will just make some assumptions and then give me a result, right? So anyway, this is the basic structure of a notebook. As you get input and outputs out of Mathematica, we'll do another just simple input and output, so 1 + 1, and then Shift and Enter to evaluate. You'll notice that the output is aligned underneath the input. If I double click the output, then the input vanishes, seemingly. But what really has happened here is that you'll notice that there's a little flag now on top of this cell, and this is the containing cell. So if you double click that cell, you're going to expand that entire cell now. So this will be about as advanced as we get for today anyway, and this should give us a good base for the rest of what we're going to do. So there are some other style sheets and that kind of thing that you can use directly in the startup. So if you're going to create a journal article, there's formatting for that, or if you're going to create a textbook, there's a setup just for that. And there's some other things in here, creative and report, and it automatically formats your notebook for you, so you can try different things. And then the other thing that's important to keep in mind is the screen environment that you're working in. So there are different environments that you can view your Mathematica notebook. The Mathematica notebook itself isn't changing, it's just how you view it and how it's being presented. So by default, it starts off in working, and that means that your document is just going to be one long document, right? It's just going to be one giant notebook. If you change that to something like presentation or slideshow, then you're going to have the slideshow environment, and you're going to use page breaks to designate where your slides end, right? But as I mentioned, I like to use that slideshow toolbar if I'm ever working with a slideshow. So anyway, that is those are the basics here. So one other thing you might want to keep in mind as you start doing more powerful evaluations and that kind of thing, you can actually see, you can find a lot of information just underneath this evaluation button, and you can see here start kernel, quit kernel. So the reason that Mathematica doesn't crash, your front end doesn't crash, your kernel might crash if you're doing some intensive calculations. And if that happens, or if it hangs up, or if you're just tired of waiting for it to finish computing, then what you can do is just go to quit kernel, and then I only have local kernels available. You all, I'm sure, do also. And then you can just quit that local kernel, and then you can restart it just by doing Shift and Enter to reevaluate something that's running. So whenever a calculation is running, this cell over on the right-hand side is going to turn dark gray. It's going to be highlighted. Anytime you come across a cell like that, it means there's an evaluation currently in progress, and you may need to restart that at some point. So anyway, that's just something that that's good to know, I think. There are going to be some other things we'll talk about in here, like parallel kernel status. So you have this little status bar to see, what kernels are working and what their workload is and that kind of thing. But that's a little bit more advanced, and we might get to that later. So, okay, so now we get to the meat of it. So this is going to be the first example. So I guessed that some people want to import data, and maybe we're going to import our built-in Mathematica data to get started. So we're going to import some data related to genomes. Is anybody working with genomes? No? Okay. Well, good. Okay, good. I was getting a little worried there because I thought, well, this might be a horrible example if nobody does anything with these. So I just picked this at random, this sequence. So I say use the documentation center here, and really what that means is if I want to find information about this ACAD9 thing, I highlighted it in this notebook, and I actually found it in Wikipedia. So let me go out there and show you where I found this, because I don't know a whole lot about this stuff. You guys know way more about this than I do. Okay, so I found this and I thought, okay, this is interesting, so let me see some more data stuff on this. Yes? Question? Oh, I haven't sent it to you, so you'll have to type in as we go. I found that people would fall asleep if I sent the notebook out. They'd just get lazy and they wouldn't follow along, so, so sorry. Okay, so anyway, the first thing we'll do is just highlight this and hit F1, or you'll need to type it in and go to Documentation Center by hitting F1, or help Documentation Center might be the easiest way to go here. So I've got this little thing that keeps popping down that I keep bringing down, so that's not going to be that great. But anyway, Help Documentation Center, and this is going to work on Windows, Mac, and Linux the same way. If you've got a Mac, it will come down with a little search menu for you right at the outset, which is pretty nice. Some of the shortcut keys that I'll talk about are a little bit different. You'll use the Command key instead of Control, but otherwise they're pretty much the same. So anyway, the workflow for me anyway is whenever I come across something I want to start working with, I'm going to dig it up in documentation. So I'm just going to type in ACA D9 into Documentation Center and hit enter. Okay, and so nothing comes up in here. That doesn't mean that we need to give up hope. What I would type in next is something like genome data. Okay, and so this yields a much more bountiful result. So 93 matches here. Now there's this interesting thing called genome lookup that we've got, and then there's some other things down here for genome data and PDB and MMCIF and that kind of thing. But maybe we'll just start with genome data. So you can click on genome data, and then of course what we get here is how to enter genome data. So we can just specify a gene, and then we'll see that we'll get the exact DNA sequence for that gene on the human genome. Or we can specify a property for that. So it will give the value of the specified property here again. And this gives the sequence from positions N1 to N2 on the chromosome that you specify. So anyway, just to keep it generic, we'll just specify the gene because we know which gene we're looking for. You know, this is something I found on Wikipedia. So maybe just show me what's going on here. So anyway, just type in genome data and then the gene, and you'll want to again specify that as you would need to in documentation. Now the shortcut here, if you forget how to specify something or how to type something out like genome data, just start typing GNO and then Control-Shift-K, and then you get a couple selections here. So genome data is what I'm looking for, so I'm just going to hit enter. Okay, so I know the gene that I need now. So ACAD9. Now, if I just type in ACAD9, what's happening is it's turned blue, and that means that this is a variable. So Mathematica sees this input as a variable, not as a property or anything else. You'll notice a couple of things about the color scheme in Mathematica, and we'll jump back to this. I'm going to jump around a little bit. But anyway, so what we need to do, because this obviously isn't right, and we have to use these, I guess, apostrophes or quotations. And so you can see here in the header for documentation, which you can get just by saying $genome data, and be sure to mind your capitalization. And so here you can see in documentation that says, okay, we have to have these quotation marks around it, and that turns anything in Mathematica into text. So once we do have those quotations around it, then it turns gray and turns into text. So it's become a string. Okay, so to evaluate again, just make sure you're in that cell, and then hit Shift and Enter, or Enter on your numeric keypad, and then it'll say Initializing Genome Indices. So that means we're going out to our servers, and then we're going to pull this string in. Does everybody follow so far? Oh, installing. Okay, so we'll wait a little while then. Wait a couple minutes for it. Yes?
Is there any background on, for lack of a better term, the provenance of this particular version of that gene?
No, I picked this at random.
What server is it coming from?
Oh, okay, so this is coming from Wolfram servers. So this is data that's compiled from broad sources. If you want to know the, I guess, set of data that it comes from, if you go into documentation and go all the way to the bottom here, it says genome data source information. And so you can click on this, it takes you out to the web source that it used. So it's typically like if it's sociology data, it's like UN data, or it's just some generally accepted database, you know. Okay, has everybody's finished loading?
How often is that server updated from the source?
Good question. So I mentioned earlier that this might come up, and I would talk about it a little bit more. So Mathematica now has two data sets. So you've got this really deep data set that's native to Mathematica, and you've got this really broad data set that's native to Wolfram Alpha. And so in version 7, when alpha was first introduced, the two weren't talking to each other. Mathematica's database is only updated, you know, once in a blue moon, because that's how often these big data sets are published. You know, you don't get updates very often to chemical data structures and that kind of thing more than once a year, that sort of thing. And then on the other hand, Wolfram Alpha data is updated, or it was being updated every 72 hours or something, you know. So you've got this team of people around the globe updating this thing around the clock, and so the challenge was to figure out how to get Mathematica to work with both. And the interesting thing you'll notice when you work with freeform input, depending on if you ever have like some sort of strange proxy issue. So I had a strange proxy issue at one school, and so what was happening was I was able to use freeform input in Mathematica to query Mathematica data, so I could pull in chemical data structures. However, I could not pull in Wolfram Alpha data, which is a little bit strange. But the idea is that those two things are still separate. In practice, they're supposed to be together, but that's how they're updated independently. But I would call the Mathematica data itself that's built in to Mathematica. It's more of a vertical, deep data set. I would call that like a professional data set. Whereas maybe Wolfram Alpha data is just more trivial type of things, although that's certainly not the aim. That's just what I have found it to be so far. You guys might find something much more useful with it.
So the deep version is, in a sense, coupled with the release.
Yeah, exactly. Although that is changing, and that they're pushing updates now. So I think as that data changes or is updated, you know, by consensus or whatever, that will be changed. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully everybody has this ridiculous amount of code imported, right? So just tons of GATTACA whatever in here, just gobbledygook. If you don't want to have to deal with all of that all the time when you're working with large data sets, you can always just use this shortener. Just use // and then reevaluate that, and now you get a ... It just yada yada yadas over you know, most of that data, so it becomes something more manageable for you. And in a lot of cases, depending on what you're working with, it will just automatically truncate that data and say, there's a very large amount of data here, show more, show all, that kind of thing. It gives you the option. Okay, so we've got this data now, and then the idea is that we can work with it. So anyway, what we can do here is take a look at some of the properties. So let's see, what was, oh, okay. So the property I've got here is biological processes. And again, we can take a look at the properties for genome data just by typing in genome data and then properties. And again, this is something we can find in documentation. And then just shift and enter to evaluate that. Or you can just go to highlight this and go to documentation, and then under more information there are properties. So you can see all of the properties out here. You could even copy and paste these back into your working notebook if you want to. So I just picked one of these properties at random, but some of these may be more appropriate for you guys. So maybe you find one that you like in here that's not biological processes. Maybe it's something like cellular components or something like that. Maybe you can just highlight that. And then I missed a portion of it. So just make that up on the back end here. And so cellular components, looks like, oh, I need to, whoops, I was supposed to replace this down here. I was working in the wrong place. So I need to specify the gene and then the property. I can't just specify a property. Okay, so mitochondrion is the result. So you can get simple one-off answers like this. So we'll move along here, and we'll say, as I mentioned, I think before in the first hour, that I always set up an assignment first whenever I'm working with data, because it makes it really easy for me to work with data then further on down the road. So if I pull in something like the full sequence of this genome here, this ACAD9, and I don't want to look at it at all, what I'll do is I'll use this semicolon, which just means suppress the output. So I don't want to see all this stuff every time. Go away. Like basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, this cell is sort of my little programming, my local programming environment, and so I just don't want to see anything extra on this. Just do the calculation for me. Don't show me any output. And then I'm going to assign this to the variable a. And we create assignments just by using a single equal sign. So a double equal sign is a comparator. Single equal sign creates an assignment. So anyway, shift and enter to evaluate that. And then we'll pull in this other genome here, SCNN1A, and we'll grab the full sequence of that too. And then we can evaluate that. So again, just shift and enter. So now we've created an assignment for A, we've created an assignment for B. It might be more appropriate if we called A ACAD9 or we called B SCNN1A. I think that would be probably best practice. That's what everybody should be doing. But for this example, which is very basic and we don't go very far into it, this should be okay. But then what we can do, because we know these are strings, right? And the reason we know that these are strings or lists is that they're protected, or I'm sorry, they're surrounded by curly braces here. So what we can do is we can do operations on them. So, I found this one called longest common subsequence. So maybe I want to find common subsequences in these two lists of data, and I can do that quite easily just by using this function. And so the way I found this longest common subsequence, and here's the explanation here. Finds the longest contiguous subsequence of elements common to the strings or lists S1 and S2. So I've got S1 and S2 here, and it gives me an example. So I know I'm on the right track, because this is basically the output that I'm getting from data. It looks just like this. So I can see exactly what I can expect to get when I evaluate this. It takes a second or so. And so this is the longest common subsequence to those two data sets. So you can do things like this very easily and quickly if you're trying to do some analyses inside strings or inside your data, something like that. This other function is called genome lookup, and that was one where when you do a Control-Shift-K, as you start typing genome, it comes up with genome data, genome lookup. This is that other function, and so I wasn't real familiar with this, but I thought it was pretty interesting. So again, we can go back to documentation and see exactly what's going on here. Just says genome lookup, and then, okay, give me the sequence. And so what this does is it returns the positions of exact matches for the DNA sequence on the reference human genome. So you know, if you're comfortable with that explanation, you understand what's going on here, and this is appropriate for your work, you can just use this genome lookup function, and it will give you this maybe interesting result. So it tells you it's on chromosome 3 and so on. As we already talked about, you can take a look at all of the elements available in the protein data set just by typing protein data or whatever data set you want and then all, or you can leave this blank, say empty set. And then you'll see here, this was what I was talking about when I said Mathematica just automatically truncates this and says, you know, there's a lot of stuff in here. Are you sure you want to see it all at once? There are 27,000 elements in this list. You know, so this might take a really long time to import, or it might take a really long time to process, or whatever, or just to scroll through. But this is fine for now. And maybe give this a shot here. So I just picked this protein at random, this Serpina3 thing, and we're just going to follow the same rules that we did before, except we want to see a molecule plot of this thing. So just hit enter, or shift and enter rather, or enter on your numeric keyboard, and then you can import this thing. Is everybody with me so far? Okay. Now, if you just move your cursor over the graphic, it turns into these little round the world arrows, and that means that you can just single click and hold and then rotate, and you can, you know, move this thing around. Now, if you're holding down click and you're rotating, you can hold control also, and then you can zoom in by moving the cursor up and down, or, you know, moving your finger on the trackpad up or down. And then if you continue to hold down your clicker and then hold shift, you can pan the image. So if you want to expand this, just move the cursor onto the graphic and then click. And then you can just grab a corner here, and don't hold control or anything, just pull that out, and then you can expand it. So you can make this graphic as large as you like. And then you can rotate it. Everybody okay importing that? Did it take an inordinate amount of time? Okay. Okay, we're having trouble downloading then? The download speed is slow? Okay. That's strange. Are we on the same network connection? Oh. Oh, really? Huh. Is anybody else having... Is it as quick for me as it is for everyone else?
You executed this already, so it probably downloaded it first time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's something worth mentioning too. Once you download the data set for the first time, then subsequent calculations go much faster. But once you initialize that indice, I mean, that may take a couple seconds. But I'm surprised that it's taking...
Downloading the packages, for instance, to build the molecule plot. Now it's downloading, it's like 70%.
Oh, okay.
90%.
Okay, okay. Okay.
So anyway, you
Okay.
can just probably go.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes, like, if I have a really slow internet connection, then it takes a little while, but normally it's almost instantaneous, even the first time it loads. So I'm curious as to what's going on with that. Okay, just we'll move quickly through here, or somewhat quickly. So as I mentioned before, the concept of a PDB file was new to me, maybe not new to you guys. But you know, I was just searching the web and came across this website, right? So here's the website, and you know, I just started searching. I think I searched for some new things that were out here. And so I found this thing, this 1ZFH. So I think that's where I ended up. I don't know if, do you guys use this database or do you use something else, or is this a common one? Or just something somebody runs out of their basement? Anyway, when I clicked download here, it just gave me this text, and so I thought, you know, I wonder if I can use this in Mathematica. And so yeah, so it just shows up in my browser as text, but it is a PDB. So I just copied the URL, and then I pasted the URL into Mathematica here. That's the same URL, and then I just type import in front of it. So you can type import, and then you'll want to use your apostrophes here when you're using this file path. And again, that's something that's specified in the documentation for import. You know, we can see that just by typing double question mark import. And you can see file needs to be specified with quotations around it. But so this one, and actually this shouldn't take any time at all to download, because we're pulling it straight off of the web, so it shouldn't take any longer than what it would normally take to download through your web browser. But so now we've got this PDB graphic that we've got directly in Mathematica, and we can manipulate this graphically, or you can change the text if you want to, or the structure of the file if you were so inclined. I thought that was a little bit interesting. So I'm going to avoid some of the more technical things and, you know, leave that to you guys as you're the pros. But instead maybe give you an idea for how to actually demonstrate this in the classroom or at a presentation. So maybe what we've got are 3 different proteins that we want to talk about, or 3 different whatever these things are, PDB files. And so what we're going to do is import those into Mathematica, and we'll just demonstrate, you know, we'll just show them. Okay, so the first thing that I do, typically just out of programming habit, is that I'll clear the variables that I'm going to work with. You don't have to. I mean, Mathematica will just automatically overwrite them, but I like to go by, you know, what I was taught in undergrad. So anyway, what I did here is in just a single cell, I just duplicated this import process. And now there are other ways of actually accomplishing this, more efficient ways of accomplishing this, but this is just, again, to demonstrate that you can do this easily. So I'm just going to say, okay, assign A to this file, and then assign B to this file, and C to this one. And then again, I'm just suppressing the output for each of these. I think I was going to have you guys, if you're following along, you can download those files from this web page. Again, I think this is a different web page I used. This is an American one? Okay. The other one was UK? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I timed out my session here apparently, but anyway, if you guys want to search for these same ones, that's fine. Or you can search for ones that you already know and work with and love. Either way, it doesn't matter. I think what I ended up doing here was, might have been download file, PDB file. I can't remember exactly how I got this, but either way, it doesn't matter. Okay, so here's exactly what I did. I had downloaded these to my desktop, and then I just simply imported these into Mathematica. So you can do the same thing. What you would do is you would download it. So here's the download. This is a new setup for me. Oh, show in folder for me. Okay, so however you want to get this onto your hard disk is fine. Because I think that's why I structured this example the way I did, because you'd actually have to import the file from your local disk as opposed to the HTML. So once you download 3 of these PDB files, to your desktop, then all you need to do is, I'm going to minimize that, is just go up to, well, you can just type in import first, and then an open square bracket, and then insert file path. Okay, and then I've got a bunch of files in here, but you just want to look through to where you downloaded that. Maybe it's in downloads or something, and then just import each of those individually. That's fine. So you would insert the file path. The file path will actually come in like file path in this way. And then all you'll need to do is close that up with a square bracket. And then if you forget to create an assignment or something off the bat, then just click or just punch in home, or I think it's is it control end? Anyway, it's either home or end to get to the beginning or end of a line, or the beginning or end of a cell. So then you can go ahead and set up that assignment. You know, you can call this variable, and then just do variable and then equal sign. So you might want to use the actual file name for that purpose. Okay, so for my example here, I've got 3 already imported. I'm just going to evaluate this cell. You can see that it's actually pulling in this data and it's creating those assignments, and then it's going to suppress all of that input. So I don't want anything else, you know, going on here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use tab view, this function called tab view, to actually create a little viewer. And I found this again just in documentation. You know, I said, you know, I think it was like viewer or something like that. So viewers and annotation, there's an entire guide in Mathematica for these things. You've got things like tab view and slide view and flip view and all kinds of cool little things, you know. So feel free to click on any of these, and then like I said, I run down to the neat examples and always take a look at what's available here. So, you know, you've got this flip view function where as you click on the card or the image, it just flips to the next one. So anyway, I chose the very simple tab view. Of course, you can pick whatever you want. And then I just said tab view and then this list, right? So when I do that and I evaluate tab view, I have this nice little interface where I can click on 1, 2, or 3, and I can see my my imported files, right? My PDB files. But this isn't really, you know, this here isn't what I would want to show in a presentation. You know, it's just kind of it's like a working notebook type thing. Maybe I'll send it to my students, but I wouldn't show anybody else this. So you know. You notice that as I move this thing around, the frame resizes and all that business. It's just kind of hacky. So again, it's very easy to change some of these properties just by taking a look at the properties of the function that you're working with in documentation. So in this case, I thought, you know, maybe the image size of 700 by 700 is about perfect. That means that I can rotate these things, and you know that viewer, that window isn't going to move on me that way. So I can actually rotate these things around and so on. You know, or I can expand them to the point where, you know, people can actually see them. And so once it's expanded once, then that's it. Or maybe I want to take it a step further for my actual presentation. So I'm going to add in some labels, and then I'm going to resize this thing. And then I'll change some of the cell formatting around also. So here you can see I changed this to a section. So if you don't have your window show toolbar thing open, open that up so that you know that you're actually in a section versus down here where I'm actually in output. But anyway, I included some of the text here of what I did. So I used tab view, and then I just said, okay, you know, I'm going to label these things, So, I mean, you can do this a lot more efficiently, obviously, and then use image size. And so now I've got the labels for for the protein I'm working with on the label for my tab viewer. So this is a lot more, professional type of environment. The other thing I mentioned in here is you'll see that there's no, this is it. I mean there isn't anything else to this here really. Now I've got this really clean interface where I can show my models. There's no out equals over here, and the way you get rid of that in and out button, or this little flag here, out, is you simply go up to Format and then Option Inspector. So Format, Option Inspector, and then you go to Cell Options here, and then I think it's under Cell Labels. Yes. So it says show cell label true, and then you can just simply uncheck that to read false, the inverse. But anyway, the point here is that you can do some pretty complex things in terms of manipulating the visualization of your notebook to make this a really nice presentation tool. Okay.
Let's say, for instance, you had maybe 100 different files.
Yeah.
You want to visualize them. You just create a list.
Yeah. Yeah, you could actually set up an import function where you import everything in a directory, or you can import things that match a certain parameter, that kind of thing also. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because it will actually dig into your directory. Yeah. Other questions so far? Okay. I had another example here where we import a Nexus file. Is anybody working with these Nexus files, Nexus format? No, nobody? Okay, maybe I chose poorly on this one.
We should use it.
Okay, we should use it. Okay. So this is one where I basically just, again, downloaded this to my desktop. This was something I just downloaded off the internet. So I actually can't remember where I got this thing. I think it was from... Anyway, I can't remember at this time where I got it from. But we could Google it if you guys want to... If you wanted to follow along. I think you could just search for... let's see, what was it called? Angiosperms.nex. Yeah, so anyway, here's the sample Nexus file. I think that's where it came from. But, as long as you have something called .nex, you'll get the exact same result, I'm sure. It's what? Okay. 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 So, okay, good. Well, at least we know about it. We know about it anyway. So you can import this, and then what I did here is I imported it, and it looks like it's not going to find it. So I need to go re-find the place that I stored it. Let's go insert file path, because that may have changed. So I'm going to go back to my desktop here. Okay, there it is again. Okay, so I basically ended up with, like you said, some labels and then some data, and this isn't in really a usable format for me anyway, for what I want to show. So I found that I needed to transpose this data. So all I did was just type in transpose, and I was able to transpose it and get it back into a format that looked a little bit more normal to me. So you had the label and then the data. Anyway, so that's all of our imported data, and then I didn't know what to put in here, so I just said, you know, find all instances of cane. I thought maybe it meant canine or something, and then replace it with dog, right? So really, all we would need to do, again, I'm setting up an assignment here. I'm calling this Angio, and then I'm just importing the exact same thing that I had done before, and I think that's going to be a problem because that's the wrong file path again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace this by going with Control L, and Control L is take the last input, Control Shift L is take the last output. So anyway, we're going to import and transpose this, and I think I'm going to do something different here. Okay, so Control L, transpose. Now we've got this assigned to a variable Angio. So all of this data now is represented by our variable Angio. And so now this is a simple way of replacing every element here. It's basically a find and replace, right? Replace cane with dog. So you can see here where there was cane, now there's dog. You know, it just verifies that. So cane was up here, and now it's dog. So really what this means, this shorthand just means replace all. And as I mentioned before, there's a ton of shorthand in Mathematica. There's really no reason to type something out like replace all. You can, but you're going to have to go through this rigmarole, you know. But we found that when you work with Mathematica enough, and you're doing these operations and these functions enough, the shorthand really helps. You know, it saves keystrokes. Everywhere you can save keystrokes and save time, it is a big benefit. But like before, you can tackle your problems in a variety of ways. You don't necessarily have to use this shortcut. But if you guys want to learn a lot more about these type of shortcuts, the more advanced programming aspects of Mathematica, like I said, they're online courses, or you can even do on-site training. That's all possible. And then they'll go through and say, okay, this is exactly how you program specifically in Mathematica. This is how you would tackle your specific problem in Mathematica. So anyway, but there's documentation on this as well. So that's a shortcut. And then just as an example for exporting, so we're just going to export this file, angio.next. You know, we've brought it in, we've modified it. Now we're going to export it again as a Nexus file. We're just going to export angio.nex and then %sign for the last output. So let me try that again. I may have inadvertently done something strange here. Okay. Well, anyway, the point is that I guess I'm not going to get this to work, because the problem with using the shortcut or the shorthand things is that take the last output is just you can really lose track of it easily. You know, what was the last thing you evaluated? It could have been something way back there, and you can get some really funky results. So this is not this is really not the recommended method of going about this. So I would say something like angio2 equals this, you know, replace all cane with dog, and then now we would say angio2, you know, just to be specific. So now, in fact, it did export this. It says out. It doesn't say successful. It just mirrors what I said. And there's actually a working directory that Mathematica has that dumps all of these exported files into automatically. And again, you can find that in documentation. It should actually be it's something called like $ directory, or directory and then open and close square bracket. So you know, if I want to see exactly where this thing went, I can see directory open and close square bracket, and then it got dumped into this My Documents folder. So there's a default directory. You can change that directory if you want to. You can export to other directories. You just have to specify which directory you want to go to, and so on. Okay, so we have a quiz. So anyway, we'll do the quiz and then take a quick break. So if anybody wants to do the quiz, you don't have to. But maybe a nice little comprehension review, that kind of thing. And then when we get back from our 10-minute break, we'll talk about the answers. Any questions? Last minute questions? Can't be related to the quiz questions? Okay. Okay, good. So we'll do this quiz, and we'll give you 5 minutes, and then we'll come back at 11:35 then, and we'll resume with the last portion, which is just a little bit more in-depth examples again. So. You can grade your quiz. Here are the 3 rules, of course. Let's see if you got them right. So the first rule, of course, is that let's get this formatted properly. The first rule is that functions are capitalized, and the second rule is that square brackets mean evaluate, and the third rule is that curly braces are lists or ranges. And then if I want to import something into Mathematica, I just type import. And then if I want to do file path, I can do file path. And I can do, I can import things that way. So, if I've got an Excel file, under the supplemental files here, I just close up that square bracket. And then I'm not going to show that actually. Or I can drag and drop something off the web, or I can drag and drop something off of, my desktop. So if I go to Wolfram blog, maybe I'll just grab a picture off of somebody. Okay, we'll grab John McLuhan's picture. Let's see, where do we go here? Okay, so. Okay, that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but here we'll just drag this onto the desktop, and then okay, now we'll import it here. So we'll just image equals John. There we go. Okay, so now we've got John as image. So we can import things in a variety of ways. You can also do insert file, or insert picture, or insert object. So there are a lot of ways of getting information into Mathematica. Yeah.
For instance, you mentioned that you can have just all the files in a directory.
Uh-huh.
Could you just do the star.jpg or something like that and import them that way?
Yeah, you should be able to grab every file of type in a directory that way. Yeah. I probably should have included an example of that. I found that like importing as an array is a popular topic.
Especially because we have so much data and then we iterate through
Yeah.
array.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. That'd be easiest.
So yeah, I can do it this way. So for instance, in a directory you have multiple JPEG files that you want to process, and let's say maybe you have a video and then you extract the frames, you want to do the processing, maybe denoising or something like that, and then per frame processing. So if you can just specify the path and then you just do the star and then .jpeg or something like that, and then load it into an array so that you can process each frame separately or in parallel, hopefully using CUDA or OpenCL.
Yep. And then the shortcut here for auto command complete is just Control-Shift-K. So if I start typing something like PLO and then Control-Shift-K, you know, if I just want to autocomplete plot, then I just hit enter. Or I just keep typing until the correct function shows up for me. That way I don't have to worry too much about how I'm specifying things. Okay, now if I want to plot a list of data, and I've just created these arbitrary data points, how do I make a list plot of this? So if I evaluate this, you know, a list in is just a list out. There's nothing else to it. So what I might do is I would say, you know, arb data equals, and then I don't want to do any extra work, so I'll just do Control L. So then I'll create that assignment. Now what I'll do is I'll just type list plot, LIS Control K, P, list plot, and then I just want to do, I really only want one here, right? So it's just arb data, and then I'm just going to delete the rest of this because I don't have a Y2. Oh, well, that didn't work. Oh, I know why. Right, because we already have brackets around that. So did everybody get why that didn't work? So the reason it didn't work is because we've got a list right here with brackets around our list, and then what I had done with list plot, when I typed in list PL list plot, you could see there are brackets here as well. So I had too many brackets, and so Mathematica doesn't know, you know, it has no idea what the depth of your list is if you've got too many brackets. So just replace that entire function input, you know, because this is making an assumption like I'm actually going to go in and make an arbitrary list, but instead I'm just going to replace that with arb data, and I can get that. So now I can also do something like list line plot, where I connect those dots too. So you can do more things with this. Again, going into documentation is going to be a great resource for that.
Can you do a 3D line plot?
3D line plot. List line plot 3D. Line plot 3D. I think what you'd want to do is you wouldn't use that function. There's a different function for it, but you can actually bring in your data and visualize it in that way. Yeah. I think you would use something like contour plot or something like that. Okay, so just available resources again. I've talked a lot about Documentation Center. The demonstrations project, again, will have a lot of really good resources as you get started that you can copy from and the Learning Center and Library Archive. So just as a quick recap, I included a link in this notebook. So if you ask me for this notebook and I send it to you, you'll have a link for this. Okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time on HPC computing because I know that that's a hot topic. I'll be perfectly honest, the examples that I was coming up with, I spent about 2 hours trying to find examples that were computationally intensive enough to even warrant going into the HPC realm. Just because it's tough to blend, some introductory examples with something like HPC computing. So what this really turned into is just a little bit of information about programming, and so creating functions. So this is something that I do a lot of with data analysis. I think you guys probably do too with matrices and data analysis. So I thought this might be useful for you. So one of the things I put in here is, you can open up this current parallel kernel status manager, which is kind of interesting, so you can keep this up and running up while you do these calculations if you want to see the little green bars go up when you're doing these calculations. But I'm going to put mine away for now. But just to recap, that's under evaluation, and then it's under parallel kernel status near the bottom there. And then there are some other options in here too, kernel configuration options and parallel kernel configuration. And you can really go in here and go out and find other kernels on your network and that kind of thing manually if you want. So there are a lot of options to explore.
If they're on the same subnet, they would see each other.
Yeah.
Can you go across subnets?
You can. My recommendation is to use Lightweight Grid Manager, which is free, that you guys have access to already, and that way it just goes out and does the discovery on its own, so you don't have to do any work. Okay, so there's, as I mentioned too in documentation, there are really good tutorials and overviews for all of these different topics. So there's actually a parallel computing tools user guide, and there's a similar one for GPU computing, and there's a lot of information in here. And then there are also professional training sessions that are offered. I think they're typically 8-hour sessions or 4-hour sessions, and they'll actually show you, a higher level. They'll give you a higher level understanding of, these deep functions. So. Anyway, so basically what I said we could start with here is mapping something over a list. So, we did an example where we replaced cane with dog, but maybe we've got, some data and we've got a list, and what we want to do is we just want to do some sort of operation to every element in that list, right? So, what we'll do is we'll just write a function, and so I'm going to clear it. I'm going to clear the function name that I'm going to use first. And again, you don't have to do this. It's not necessary at all. But maybe this is the function I'm going to write. So fun, and then I'm going to specify what fun is. So what you're going to do when you write a function, and you don't have to write a function this way either. You can actually write out function if you want, and you can specify a function that way. And you can get the documentation on function, and you can go that route. That's easy to do, but I take the shortcut route, and so for this session and our limited time, we'll take the shortcut. So we can make z we can do whatever we want to z over here. So I just said z. Anytime so basically what I'm doing is I'm creating my own function. I'm creating my own Mathematica function here. So maybe we'll just make z square its argument. Okay. Or maybe we'll do control caret to make our syntax look nice, right? So we'll square it. Okay. So now what's happened here is that anything that I write after fun, so if I write fun and then 2, what happens here is 2 gets squared, because that's just how I've structured this function assignment. Okay. There's also well, we'll mention this later. So anyway, if I want to map this over a list, this function, so I want to square every element in a list, what I would do is I would just map fun, and then this is map over this list, and then I can evaluate that. So as I have here, it's the exact same thing as writing this all out, Again, just shorthand. It's all the same super function, so you're not really going to gain any computational speed by taking this approach, but you will save some stress on your wrists because you won't be typing quite as much. So, but you can do whatever you would like. I mean, you're simply just operating on whatever goes into the argument for z here. Okay, so as I mentioned, it was difficult to come up with a time-consuming example. But this example, does everybody understand what I'm doing here? Does this make sense at this point? Have we gone over enough that this is not gobbledygook? It still might be gobbledygook. So, okay, what this is doing here, because we haven't actually talked about pound sign yet, but what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we want to evaluate pi, and what we're going to do to pi, and if you remember this numeric approximation function n, n has this structure where it says, okay, give me the argument, and then give me the level of precision that you want. So I could estimate pi out to a bazillion decimal places if I want to. It's just how long do I want to wait for this thing to chug away, you know, and calculate it. And actually somebody told me that pi actually terminates at some point. Somebody just realized this. I don't have any more detail on that. But anyway, so the example here is that we're just approximating pi to a certain level of precision. And so this just means empty slot. So this could be anything. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, this anything, instead of just coming up as a normal pound sign, it becomes a functional argument when we put the ampersand behind it. So this just signifies to Mathematica that this is actually, we're actually going to do something with this. This is a something and not a nothing. And that's the explanation for now. So anyway, what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, this something is going to be replaced by something else back here. And so this something else back here is the range of numbers from 1 to 10,000. So what we're going to do is we're going to estimate pi out to 1 decimal point, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10,000. So the result is this thing right here. You can see it runs for quite a while. I think it took 30 seconds the last time I evaluated it. That's what it's showing is 30.295. But I don't know. I think it'll depend a lot on your hardware and how spunky it feels today. So anyway, is anybody else running this thing and has a result yet? I tried to make it as labor intensive as possible. Okay, good. Wow, it ate its Wheaties this morning. Okay, so then what I did is I said, okay, what if we just use parallel map instead? So we're going to map. Yeah. So pi, you can use the function capital Pi, or you can use escape pi escape. And you can do the same thing with things like omega, so escape, omega, escape. Or you can do escape, theta, escape. And then there are even shorter abbreviations for these. I think it's like escape th, escape for theta. Yeah, so you don't even have to spell it out entirely. Good question. Okay, and then, so instead, just to use our parallel functionality, and I'll pull up my parallel kernel status for this. So we should see these things skyrocket. So evaluation, oops, it went away. Parallel kernel status. Oh, it says 2 kernels running busy, so it doesn't like that I had opened this up mid computation. That's not very. It's not a very nice thing to say. Okay, there it is. So now we can see that In fact, I'm totally maxing out my local cores. Here. Okay, so it took 8 seconds apparently to do the same thing using parallel, so using all of my kernels. What's that? So each license by default is set to run 4. But if are you at LSU? If you're at LSU, you can run an unlimited number. Oh, okay, okay. So in that case, just in general, each license just runs 4 kernels. So if you have a Tesla or something like that, you need to add more kernels on there, more compute kernels.
So how do you specify that?
How would you specify adding on more kernels?
Do you do it with GUI, or can you specify it from the command?
It's actually something that's done on the back end, like on the customer service end, where they configure the license. I'm not sure exactly how that occurs, but I think it just says, I think if you go to kernel configuration options, and then you can edit these things, I think you can get to it from there. Okay. And then I had another example where we import an Excel spreadsheet and modify it. So we can just import this thing real quick. We can call it lab data. So again, you know, if I forgot to create an assignment, as I did here at the top, maybe I'll just type in lab data and then Control L. If I'm confident that this is going to work. You know, obviously we've seen a couple instances already today that, you know, if you become too hacky, then you might run into some trouble. And then maybe what we're going to do is then map this function that squares its argument over lab data. So we're basically just going to, we're basically saying, okay, whatever is in lab data, we're going to square, and we're just going to put that, we're going to iterate that over every element. So we can do that. Obviously, you know, it's gone 1 0 1 0 4 and then 0.09 and then 16 and then 0.0081. So obviously it's worked. And then we can easily make a list plot of lab data too if we want, you know, and then we can compare that to lab data and see what that looks like, you know. Or we could do lab data and then lab data 2 or something. Okay, that wasn't exactly what was supposed to happen, but you can see here, you know, how you're supposed to plot multiple points or plot multiple lists, which I just didn't follow there. So, okay, so I had a challenge here of creating a 2D or 3D graphic. What's that? It's very important. Okay, so I was going to do the thing where I ask you to do something, but then I don't tell you how to do it necessarily, so you have to go out and figure out how to do it on your own. So I'll make a couple graphics up here, and then you guys can, because we're running really short on time, you guys can try and make one on your own too. So just whatever you want to do. I'm just going to do a couple basic ones here. So. Okay, so maybe I'll make a pie chart, and then, you know, when I click on this pie chart, I can expand pieces of the pie, you know, or maybe I want a 3D variant of this thing, pie chart 3D. So now I can rotate it, and I can, you know, really wow all my business school colleagues. How can I get that in Excel? Oh, I can't. So anyway, that's I just thought this was kind of nice. So maybe for a 3D graphic, you know, what I'll do is I'll do like a plot 3D, but I don't want to type all that out. Whoops. Being up at 3 a.m. is starting to kick in now. Okay, well, let me get back down here. PL plot 3D. Okay, and then my function is going to be sine of x, and then we're going to do cos of y, and then we're going to say x. Go goes from negative pi to pi. And then y is going to be, we'll do negative pi to pi too. Okay, now when I evaluate this thing, I've got sine x times cos y, and I've got this funky little graphic down here, that I can zoom in on, I can manipulate. So, this is okay, but like I said, I've got kind of a short attention span, so maybe I'm going to manipulate this thing. So I'll just do a manipulate. Maybe I'll auto-complete it. Manipulate expression. I'm just going to take my last input for the expression, and then my variable that I want to manipulate here, maybe it's going to be something like z, and then I'm just going to say z goes from 1 to 10. Now I can reevaluate this thing, and I can adjust the value of z, or I can play this, make it run on its own if I want. Everybody follow that? Or have anything spectacular that beats the socks off of this example? Probably. Yes? Yeah, you can. So what you would want to do when you save a movie is, if you're saving it as a .mov or .wma or whatever, really what you would want to do is you would just say export, and then I think I would call it like movie.mov, but then of course export, you have to have it's a file path, so you have to use the quotations around it. So it'd be like movie.mov, and then in this case I'll try and cheat again and see if I can get away with it. Export. So I'm basically exporting this thing as a movie, and then it comes up in my directory as a movie, or it should anyway when it's done exporting. So it's still running, it looks like. Sometimes, because unless you specify otherwise, it saves in the highest quality, so it takes a while depending on what kind of hardware you've got, and apparently this is saving all sorts of wild things. So, but anyway, that's how you do it. It should work just fine, because it hasn't crashed immediately, so that just means it's actually working. I'm going to go ahead and stop that though. Okay, so we've got just a last minute challenge, I guess. So, you guys are all in the bio field, so the gold mine is that you've created this new drug, and it's effective in 30% of cases, so find the probability it's effective in 3 out of 4 patients. So you can do it, or I'll just show you the answer. So all I did is I highlighted this, and I made the background black so that you couldn't see the text. But I'll just go clear formatting, and you can see what I use. This is actually an example in the documentation. So this is new in Mathematica 8, is that you can compute probabilities. And in this case, we're using a binomial distribution, and we can evaluate this, so it's 8% probability that it's effective in 3 out of 4 patients. So maybe not too great. Maybe we shouldn't leave academia too quickly there. And then find the expected number of successes when applied to 500 cases. Of course, you would do something with expectation. This function, again, new in Mathematica 8. And then you can always just highlight that and go to Documentation Center and read, how this thing is structured. But in this case, you'd have 150 successes out of 500 cases. So anyway, that is that's the wrap up, the hands-on portion. So if you guys have any questions, or you want to see the notebook or anything like that, feel free to send me an email. I think I'll be getting a registration list, so I'll probably just try and send the notebook out to everybody on that list, so that you'll have it to play with and experiment with. I'll send both this and the other notebook out. So anyway, thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your Friday.
like